now. Um, Today's webinar is a conversation between our own Scott Foster, Michael Bennett, Mark Costa, Joshua Lappin, and Francis Sawyer, and its opportunities, challenges, and obstacles to rebuilding Los Angeles following the recent devastating fires. Michael Bennett is the founder and board member of Enniscorthy International Forum, and he's also a builder and developer in Ireland. Mark Costa is Director of Policy and Planning at the Energy Coalition in California. Josh Lappin is a postdoctoral fellow at Rothermore and postdoctoral research associate at the University of Notre Dame. I've been listening to my colleague Scott just pronounce it when he doesn't do his French accent. Francis Sawyer is a climate and finance policy expert and the founder of Pleiades Strategy, a research and advisory firm helping stakeholders across sectors navigate and shape the policy, politics, and economics of the energy transition. She previously served as a policy advisor to Tom Steyer and the administration of California Governor Jerry Brown. This is a fireside chat. There isn't a presentation, but because it's so topical, people, if you have questions, raise your hand or rudely interrupt if you have to. Otherwise, keep your microphone on mute to let the conversation flow. So you're all very welcome, and I'm handing over to Scott to kick off. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the speakers, especially on the West Coast, who've gotten up at a very early hour of the morning to speak. A double thanks to Mark for doing so while under the weather, I guess under the weather in multiple senses of the word. We've brought this fireside chat together just given the devastation that everybody's witnessed in California. And when you see the numbers of people who've just lost everything in the fires and how those fires were really difficult to control given the Santa Ana winds and the rest of it, it was just a hot fire burning constantly. They finally managed to get it out. Now you're faced with neighborhoods that have been completely wiped out, and there is an urgent and critical need to rebuild. So, from one perspective, speed is of the essence, need to get people back into homes. From another perspective, you've got cost is an issue. You want to get things up quickly and efficiently and get people back in. But that raises a whole host of issues that we will get into. Before I dive into those questions and start asking of our panelists, maybe I can turn to Mark, if you're the right one, to give us kind of a sense of where the conversation stands in Los Angeles. There's all sorts of different angles coming in. How do you see it progressing right now?
Yeah, I mean, well, just this is a great opportunity to get plugged into some of the best minds, right, in the building sector around the world. So it's really good to have this as a sounding board in the fireside chat. And you're right. I mean, there's people that, I mean, everybody knows somebody that has just had a devastating loss in, right. And it's in two locations. So there's some context, some immediate context, right? We have the Palisades area, which is very affluent coastal. And then we have Altadena, which is a great neighborhood, but it's farther inland. So these are not geographic adjacent, but they are. I mean, it just shows you how large Los Angeles County is, right? 88 cities plus unincorporated. So two simultaneous complete disasters. Just one thing I think that's helpful to start off the conversation is just the previous year's history, which has been an accumulated buildup of real emphasis and thought and concern about California's energy sector in general, which I think is really going to help hopefully move things in the right direction in the rebuild. But when I was thinking about what can I share about this, and there's just not the immediate like rebuild, and we can also speak about that a little bit. But it just reminds me, somebody had commissioned me to write a report on the legislative threats to the energy sector last year, right? And so I had to deliver this report to some elected, folks at the local government level, which I'm very involved in. And I had to detail like a forensic analysis, like a point by point about what happened in the legislature at the state level, right, in the assembly and in the Senate, in what was not just perceived, but it was a real all-out assault on energy programs in California. And we had to activate that. And it was born out of, rising energy prices, right? The rates are one thing, people's total monthly bills are another thing. And the high, both on electricity and gas, right? So in response to that, the legislature put in a slew of bills. A lot of activation happened to kind of tamp those down or modify them. And then at the tail end of the year, there was an executive order by the governor that ordered in different ways, but the Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission and the Air Resources Board, and there was all different aspects of it, to go sniff out where they could go find, things they could cut that were frivolous and unnecessary. And there's drivers that are underneath that we don't need to go into. But, that's leading up to where we are now, right? There's this kind of real examination of how we're spending the money and what's happening and what the drivers are. And there's agreement in some areas, disagreement in other areas. Now we're at the point where, well, we have two towns that have completely burned down and there's devastation and it's still ongoing, right? So I just wanted to set that context because now people have been like, their antennas have been up on this. And now there's, some real action to take. I'm going to pause there and see if you want to either restate the question or if either Joshua or Francis want to, chime in. But I think that context is important.
Well, it is. And in fact, I'm going to come back to Joshua in a moment on the whole transition issue, because as you painted it, the transition was already under threat before the fires because of the costs and security of supply and the rest of it. And then you have this wiping out of two neighborhoods. I think I've got this statistic right that there are only 7 states in the United States that have populations that are greater than the county of Los Angeles. So Los Angeles County is really enormous, and this has huge consequences. One of the issues that I saw, and I think this came from the mayor wanting to waive building codes because of the need for speed and the need to get stuff up and running. I'd like to ask Michael Bennett first, if I may. Michael's based in Ireland, but he's a builder in Ireland. And I think you've got some views on how much it costs to build, I'll say a building right, and how much it costs to build a building the way people do it all the time. And if you could speak to, are they that different? Is there a difference in waiving building codes, or is it something we could build on? You have to unmute first, Michael.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, everyone. The first and most important thing you've mentioned is waiving building codes. There's a whole lot of things. My knowledge of Los Angeles, I've been there twice, but just on holiday. But as regards waiving building codes, I would not be in favor of that. Now, I know building codes at times can be a little bit over the top. Maybe not waiving them, maybe looking at being more efficient with the of the local authority with the building codes, and follow up on them quite fast. That will help speed it up some. Another area that I haven't heard mentioned is Los Angeles, as a state, is very dry, and I've had an aunt out there. That's how I've come to be out there. And you don't get rain from one end of the year to the other, so you don't have the dampness like we have here in Ireland. And in going forward and rebuilding, I'm of a thought of, is there any one having a look at to see how, if this fire comes again, how the whole place is not just wiped out again and again and again as the climate changes. And there's a lot of trees. The trees are dry, so that's kinder. That will burn and burn very quickly. So, you've heard the expression, a concrete jungle. Ground is more or less barren or concrete walls. If you don't have flammable construction or flammable materials around that will burn, the fire can go nowhere. Now, I know aesthetically it doesn't look great, but I think it may be an area that has to be maybe looked at out there. I'm just glossing over a few things. You mentioned building costs. What happens inevitably once you start with an epidemic of building, and that's what you need out there. Building costs only go the one way; they go up. Materials go up. Suppliers supplying materials go up. The builders will probably look for a bigger margin. There's an urgency on it, so they're working longer hours, just overtime, all that type of thing involved. And all that helps to drive costs up. Where what we're trying to do is trying to keep costs at a level. And I'm just throwing out the idea there how you handle that, or how you get control it. It's another very, very big question. Sorry, Scott, you're coming in.
Thanks for that. Could you just remark quickly on the traditional versus the high performance? Because the supply demand is going to drive everybody's costs up. Is there an enormous gap between those two if you build it right, or if you build it the way it's always been built in terms of cost?
It's, I've found over the years it costs just as much to do bad buildings as good buildings.
Okay.
And as you know, Scott, we've been in the business of building passive houses since 2007. And, using the give and takes in the difference in building, we have found that the cost is, it's equal. If you build your standard block house, plaster and all that, we built a block on the outside, which is just for weather protection, on a timber frame inside, which carries the whole structure of the house. But we've found that building costs, we watch costs very closely, and we've found over the years and proved that building costs are equal.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn now to Joshua, if I may. You mentioned, Michael, this idea of repetitive cycles. And I'm wondering, how can we avoid that this happens again, especially when we're rebuilding? Are there, if you don't know the answer to this one, it may be an unfair question. Are there certain kinds of buildings that I would say high performance buildings that resisted burning more than others? How do you find the whole reconstruction of Los Angeles fitting in with the energy transition that we're looking for? And if it doesn't cost any different, why don't we build just high performance? We resist better and quality of life is improved. Do you have any thoughts? And if you want to talk to a different topic, you're welcome to as well.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm no construction or building design expert, but one piece of the conversation that's been very significant, I think, across Los Angeles in the wake of the fires is trying to balance the house-by-house considerations with the systemic considerations, because these are fires that have encompassed an entire neighborhood,
right?
Several entire neighborhoods. A lot of the systemic conversation has focused on fuels management and the question of the wildland-urban interface. But just quickly to a point that Michael raised, because it's been a part of the conversation frequently, there's an assumption that there's forest adjacent to these neighborhoods. And in Southern California, often you don't actually have trees, you have chaparral ecosystem, which is brushland. And that leads to different management considerations, because the clearing of brushland is a Sisyphean task. And I think that component of the conversation has largely spun its wheels, in my view. I come at the systemic questions from a different angle because I'm an energy systems researcher. And so the work I've been doing in the wake of the fires is thinking about the ways in which we can rebuild the energy systems that power these neighborhoods differently, to reduce costs, to speed rebuilding, to increase resilience, and also potentially to reduce fire risk. There's been a lot of attention on the electrical distribution sector and the system in the wake of the fires. That's for good reason. It looks possible that Southern California Edison's system sparked several of these fires, and in California over the last decade in particular, we've become very familiar with electric system ignitions creating wildfires and firestorms. There's been almost no attention to the gas distribution system, though, and both of these neighborhoods are supplied by pipeline natural gas. And I'm hopeful that there will be more of a conversation and more of a consideration of the role that the gas system plays in the resiliency or lack thereof in these neighborhoods. Both because I think there are a lot of questions surrounding the role that the gas system has played in exacerbating these fires once they became neighborhood rather than wildland fires. And certainly, I think everyone who's seen photo and video journalism of these destroyed neighborhoods has seen flaring gas lines even many days after the fires.
Right.
So I think there's a series of questions surrounding what role the gas system played in making firefighting more complex in these neighborhoods. But then there's also a set of questions about the cost and the sustainability of rebuilding. That if the gas system has to be largely rebuilt to serve a home population, and I'd be very interested to hear the observations of the housing people on the call about this, but a new set of built homes that are likely to use significantly less gas than their predecessors, I think there's some serious questions about the fiscal stability of that system into the future if their revenues are likely to be much lower.
You mentioned that there was sparking on the distribution network that might have been one of the causes of the fire. I guess I have two remarks. As you can see here, I live just outside of Paris, and in France, we have undergrounded all of the distribution networks. So both visually, when you look around a neighborhood, you don't see wires everywhere, and you don't have that problem with overhead wires being affected by wildfires. Secondly, if you do have that chaparral type ecosystem, maybe it was the utilities spark, but maybe it was some kid setting off a firecracker. That's an accident waiting to happen, regardless of what the spark was. Um, do you have any thoughts on urban design that could deal with both of those questions at fire breaks or undergrounding?
Yeah, so I think these are two very good points. On the question of undergrounding, I think interest in undergrounding the distribution system is the most consistent thing I have heard from fire survivors and members of these neighborhoods. It's universal. I think some of that stems from the understanding of the causes of these fires or the potential causes of these fires, and some of that stems from people's awareness of an ongoing conversation in California over the last decade, particularly in Northern California, where undergrounding has been presented as the major solution to avoiding wildfire ignition in these neighborhoods. And I do think it offers significant benefits. The challenge here, and I'd be interested to hear about the comparison to the French context, is the cost. It can run to an order of magnitude more expensive to underground lines than to distribute electricity above ground. The thing I should note about these fires and their possible ignition source is that right now the Hearst and the Eaton fires, which are the two Los Angeles County wildfires from a month ago, where Southern California Edison, the electric utilities lines, are suspected of potentially causing ignition. The lines in these questions are high voltage transmission lines, not distribution lines, which is an important distinction for thinking about what undergrounding is possible, but it doesn't change the fact that distribution lines, of course, can be wildfire ignition, sources of wildfire ignition as well.
Yeah.
I think it's...
All right, go ahead. Sorry.
But just to say that I think it's still an important part of the conversation. One of the areas that I've been engaged most in research on is examining whether removing the gas system from these neighborhoods can reduce the cost of electric undergrounding by removing the flammable hazard that makes trenching slower and riskier and therefore more costly. And I think as we imagine reorienting these energy systems to reduce the systemic risk to these neighborhoods going forward, simplifying and having one potential energetic ignition source rather than two is of great benefit, and even more so if it can structurally reduce the risk of fire.
All right, thank you. Mark, I'm going to come back to you real quick. One of the things I've read is that some people aren't waiting. They're actually settling down somewhere else. They've decided to move out. The risks for them are too high of rebuilding, and it might happen again. They're not able to get insurance, which is going to bring me to Francis here in a minute. Um, and as a result, they're kind of uprooting and moving somewhere else. The ecosystem is a desert ecosystem, and you could argue that is rebuilding the way we had it before the right way to go? I've seen all of the politicians saying, we're going to rebuild. Yes, we can. We're going to do it. Is that the right solution? Is that what people are seeking to do? Do you have a sense, Mark?
It seems like a little bit of a mixed bag. I mean, this is home for people, right? I mean, some of these people have generations of families that have founded the towns or built everything on Main Street in Altadena, right? So there's a lot of history here where some people just, I mean, this is home. You can't, you know, home is not, for some people, some place that's not going to burn down, right? So there's some people have no choice. Some people, may have the luxury of moving, and some people, may not. Um, how do you transfer that equity? The insurance is a real, hairy piece as well. Um, but what I would say is that there's a real urgency for people to get back and see some action. And in fact, I called in um, to the Altadena, so they don't have a city council. It's a town, they have a town council because it's unincorporated. Effectively, pretty similar governance structure. But so I called in and I'm like, well, this is the opportunity to, advocate for, passive house and, all electric. And it was just too fresh to, start recommending things, right? I mean, they were having briefings on how do you identify it's a real FEMA worker that's testing for heavy metals that seep into your soil from your car melting, right? Who's going to tow the car? How can you identify a scam? The Red Cross is coming. When is it safe to come back? How to not get particulate in your lungs when you go to find your belongings. I mean, that was the town hall meeting. I mean, they were not there yet.
Yeah.
And some of the other things on those calls, I mean, so that just points to the, people want to get back and don't want to move. I'm sure there are people that have, relocated or in the process of doing that. But for the average person, I mean, it's not easy to go buy a new home, right? All the insurance settlements. I mean, there's a lot of process that goes there. And there's still a lot of uncertainty on literally the dust settling on this to make that decision. But some of the things that came up in the beginning were, the permitting issue. I mean, I've heard some, recommendations of, well, we're going to have rapid permitting. We'll have LA County come in and set up the permitting jurisdiction is a little odd when it's an unincorporated state. So it's LA County, and then you're going to have Public Works involved. And, let's just, waive the land use and plan check part of, getting a permit. And the check and balance there is going to be the site inspection, right? But it seems like, well, if you're a registered architect or PE, right, the professional engineer, as long as there's a stamp on those plans, we'll let you build it. And then, so to me, that was a little alarming because if you already have plans or if they're maybe not up to code, or maybe if you're specifying combustible materials, what makes us think that another fire is not going to happen? I mean, what's going to make you think the vegetation is not going to go back, right? So how can we do it done right? I know that's been a theme of this group. So it seems like there's this real fine line of balance between urgency and listening to the community, but also kind of, I don't want to say seeing clearly because it's, hindsight's always 2020, but how do we make decisions under uncertainty, right? And what's the best advice right now for decision makers?
My understanding is that you are suffering from pretty heavy downpours these last days, that it's been a lot of storms coming through. And the outcome of that is that the chaparral grows back, and that becomes tinder for the next fire. And there are large parts of Los Angeles County that didn't burn this time. And not even the rebuilt areas, but the areas that didn't go up in flames are sitting ducks for the next one. I guess my question is, who's managing the master plan for reconstructing what burned and protecting what hasn't burned? Is there somebody who's got control of that baton?
Well, Joshua, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but LA County has engaged in a resilience plan. Maybe I can chat the link, but a few years back, there was a climate vulnerability assessment. And one of my kind of favorite interactive tools from that exercise was this cascading impact analysis that has this interactive, all these bubbles and these lines between them. If electrical provisioning goes down, what else is at risk, right? So, I mean, water systems, cellular communication networks, the ability for emergency response, so on and so forth, all the civic functions, so the largest thing that is at the root of that relationship diagram is the electrical provisioning, which is a little different than distribution systems. But just think, if the power goes down, what else goes down?
No water pumps.
Right. I mean, you could even see it in Texas when they had their snowstorm that went down. They pump, takes electricity to pump gas around too.
Yeah,
right?
no gas pumps. Yeah.
So that is something that's both the local responsibility, both legislated, right? I mean, there's a responsibility of local governments to have plans for this. Here we have emergency operation centers, and at the county level, some cities do as well. A lot of cities do. And then also we have CAL FIRE, and there's been direction for CAL FIRE to update their fire hazard maps, because a lot of these geographies that were just not in the fire threat map.
Right.
So now they're using a different criteria to specify that kind of stuff. In fact, I'm surrounded on all three sides of me personally at my home where I'm sitting right now by the exact vegetation that's caused these other fires. And I looked at the fire threat map, and I was shocked that my neighborhood's not in it, because I mean so I think some of that criteria needs to change, and I think it was changed. It was ordered to be changed. But I mean, there's layers of it, right? There's the local government, city responsibility, there's county responsibility, then there's state level responsibility, and then of course we have the triumvirate coming in on the federal response.
I am ex PG&E, just to announce my colors a little bit, from California, Northern California. And the issues that they've had were related to wind, causing the high voltage systems to spark. And that generated a lot of forest fires up in the north. So suddenly, in thinking through the reconstruction and the management, you're dealing with fire, you're dealing with flood, you're dealing with wind, you're dealing with earthquakes. So undergrounding everything is exposing you to a different slate of challenges. So it ain't easy. I'm going to come back to insurance here, and I'm afraid we've lost Francis, but I will kind of put it out on the table and see if anybody has a reaction. A number of insurance companies are actually withdrawing from the insurance business for homeowners in California. They've done it in Florida. They're doing it in the south of France because the climate risks imposed by all of these different factors are too much for them to handle. There was a quote from Powell yesterday, I think, or the day before, Jerome Powell, saying that if you can't get insurance, you can't get a mortgage. And if you can't get a mortgage, then suddenly that housing market, rebuilding or selling and or refurbishing suddenly becomes very, very challenging. And I think that would be a major, major consideration in the reconstruction program. Are we going to be able to ensure the next generation of homes? I see that one of our colleagues is going to have to step off. I want to ask Philip if he'd like to offer any observations. We want to take advantage of you while you're on the line. Philip, do you have any thoughts on what we've been talking about? Or have I lost Philip already?
He's gone already, I think.
He's gone already. Okay, well, I take that all back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Mark, you or Joshua have any thoughts on what I just said about the whole insurance and mortgage issue, because it looms large to me. That would be the crash of a major industry if that happens. Joshua, you're nodding your head yes, so I'm going to call on you.
Sure. I agree that it's a major crisis facing not just California, but everywhere, because insurance are risk pooling mechanisms, and climate change is changing the risk landscape in a way that fundamentally produces more and more systemic risks and more tail end risks. So I think there's a particular problem facing these neighborhoods, but also just a systemic problem facing the entire globe.
Okay.
That's, California has been one of the states that has been experiencing this in the United States context earliest, and has tried to produce, we have a state insurer of last resort now, and the state insurance commissioner has done some work to try to provide backstops for private insurance. But I think the scope of the current crisis suggests that a broader and more comprehensive solution is going to be needed. I see Mark has something to add as well.
Yeah, it's there's the insurance industry, but there's also pretty robust risk analysis firms. I want to just come back to that in a second, but on the insurance part, it's being in the circle of the Department of Energy and National Research Labs for quite a few years. I've seen insurance and reinsurance agencies have direct interest in the research capabilities of those agencies to assess risk, to identify what their premiums should be. And I've seen that in the past, particularly for the Northeast, in terms of, the cold snaps, in terms of using building energy modeling to figure out how many hours would it take for a person to die in their house if the power went out. And that was a direct, I was on a review committee for that, right? So so I was kind of shocked. And so it's hard for me to believe that the risk profile has actually changed before and after the fire, right? Is it like one day they woke up and said, hey, we're going to increase premiums by 22% for everybody in California because this fire happened. Oh, that's news to us, right? No, it's not. It's not news. That risk profile was there. It just happened, and now they have to deal with it. So that goes hand in hand with how different stakeholders are doing risk assessments. And so just for a local government group, a nonprofit that we have a lot of members on that, we had a big risk assessment agency that does this for the Public Utilities Commission and some utilities. You give a briefing on just like a one-on-one on what is risk assessment. Yeah. And the bottom line is risk is in the eye of the beholder. But that also plays a big factor in this stuff too that can't really be ignored.
Michael, you wanted to come in on that?
Yes, Scott. Ireland is no different. As I said already, we have a lot of rain here, and we have rivers tend to burst our banks. And our insurance industry in this country is, it's not that they won't give you a higher premium. They just will not insure either your business or your home in these particular areas. And we've had quite a bad storm in the last few weeks here. The last of our power, there was something like 800,000 people or homes without, and businesses without ESB or without electricity. And the last of them have been turned on today after 3 weeks. And that's people trying to run businesses and trying to live with no electricity. And I'm guessing already, I reckon our insurance people are looking at those areas that have been out, have had a lot of claims. And I'm expecting now that this is a new phenomenon. You know, if you're in a high wind area or a high risk area, we just will not insure you. So it seems to be the same all over the world.
That disturbs me a lot, in the sense that the world is changing, whether we're talking about disease and epidemics, whether we're talking about home insurance, whatever. And Joshua said it correctly a moment ago that insurance is really about risk pooling and sharing out of the risks. Um, if a private insurer has primary responsibility to shareholders to provide a return, then it's not in their interest to provide an insurance policy to a high risk client. Therefore, there might need to be some reassessment of what's the right model for the insurance industry, some kind of a co-op approach or a different approach where you are pooling and sharing out the risks. So the neighborhoods that didn't get burned down, they're actually paying premia as well to those that did burn down. And it's almost like a self-insurance approach for communities. Now, that's getting a bit radical, maybe even socialist, but the current model doesn't seem to be working very well. Bob Cavey, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, this may not be helpful, but I'm going to make a proposal or a suggestion and see if it gets any traction. If one looks at what's at Los Angeles in the context of, say, the last 100 years or so, 150, whatever number you want to pick, of development, then it has a kind of uniqueness to the crisis there. It's not that no other community has ever had these kinds of problems, but climate change has produced some outcomes. Those outcomes are now burning down big chunks of cities. This is a new thing. If you look at it in a broader frame, say 500 years, you could say something like, every place people have gone new, it looked like it was going to be impossible to make a stand, and engineering has been the key to unraveling that, or to some extensive degree has been the key to unraveling that. So why make these observations just now? Building on the crisis that has befallen that region, could one say something like this? The whole world, in one way or another, is heading to being Los Angeles. That's what climate change means. That all of these places are going to face, or lots and lots and lots of places are going to face major resilience challenges. So the way to think about Los Angeles, and I think I'm kind of barking up a tree that somebody else had planted a couple of minutes ago, but the way to think about Los Angeles, despite the sadness of the situation, is that it's an opportunity to create a prototype of what lots, maybe all communities will have to be going forward. That is to say, they will have to rethink themselves so they can live under very new conditions, which are coming down the track, like a freight train. And there's nothing on the scene at the moment that will stop those new conditions from getting here. It has got to Los Angeles first.
I think that's extremely helpful, Bob. Let me try a proposition on all of you, including the audience here. I don't want to say there's a silver lining to the devastation because that's a horrible way to put it. But if I'm going to build a structure, a home, and it's going to last for 50 years, can I, in any circumstance, given that the climate is changing and it's just getting worse, can I afford to build to anything less than the highest standard? And I'm not just talking about energy efficiency and flame and water and the rest of it. I'm talking about a high performance building writ large. You've got to actually go beyond current building codes and build at the highest possible standard, or you're digging yourself into a deeper hole within 10 years. And then I would ask, shouldn't mobility be part of the equation as well? Because you're reconceiving the whole infrastructure of these communities. If you can get people to be able to move around in a different way, that can also contribute to the sustainability equation. I'm going to turn that one to Joshua in just a moment, but Michel has his hand up, and I always call on people who have their hands up. Michel, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Regarding all the consideration which were exchanged about insurance and building code, I think also we have to change, basic setting of building code. And I'm thinking, for example, a ventilated roof. You cannot build anymore with a ventilated roof, but some code are requiring that you ventilate your roof. But the problem is that when you have a fire, small sparkles can go into your ventilated room and you can start a fire like that. On the other hand, when you see, for example, we have been renting from time to time a house in Florida, I've seen the latest version of houses, which are, kind of hurricane proof. So they are concrete, the roof is anchored until the foundation. So there is a way to build, and the only thing which can happen that you might lose, a few shingle, so that you can at the end become self-insured. You don't need any more insurance, which can be a big saving. So it might be worth to think about how much do you have to add to have this kind of house, instead of to build maybe now, which is the average 5,000 square feet carton paper house. It's probably better to be in a 2,000 feet concrete one, which is going to last, some climate change. And of course, it will be a little bit less visible, but is it the main purpose in life also? So there is also maybe some way of thinking that we have to change on the code, but on ourselves also. That was a few remarks. Thank you.
I appreciate that. That's a very good point. I would also add that the insurance companies should be more interested in insuring a building that is less risky. And therefore, the type of structure you've just described would be more insurable at lower premia than houses that wouldn't withstand all those issues. Joshua, I promised I'd call on you, so it's your turn now.
Sure. In response to all of this good conversation, I'd just say that this is one of the roles that a strong building code plays, I think, right? Because these are disasters. Fire in particular is a disaster that doesn't treat each structure as independent and individual. Your fire risk is determined by your neighborhood and by the buildings around you and even buildings far from you. And I think the home hardening conversation thus far has largely focused on the individual choice of the builder and the homeowner, which is clearly a necessary part of the equation. But the value of standards is that imposing a standard across a neighborhood or a region reduces everyone's risk. And I think that's one of the things we've seen in the burn patterns preliminarily, is that your likelihood of burning is determined not only by your own landscape management and home design, but also by those surrounding you. Yeah. So that's there's a social action component of this, which is critical, to the point of building in a way that reduces insurance costs. I think that's a critical part of this conversation. Insurers are being pressured right now, especially at the state level, to better incorporate assessments of fire risk. I think there are a variety of equity concerns related to that. The metrics that insurers have sometimes used thus far are imperfect ways of capturing actual structure risk, but do capture other socioeconomic factors, which goes back to the earlier comments about the necessity of having open, transparent, and possibly public risk assessment. But I think the more we can transcend those questions by addressing risk systemically rather than at the individual building level, the better. And the energy comments I made earlier about the electric and gas systems are one part of that, but obviously setting structure standards is another part as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The whole concept of taking a systemic look, bringing in smart systems, connecting up the buildings into taking advantage of the networks that they represent, suddenly allows you to address a lot of the energy challenges that Mark described were out on the table even before the fires, and they can become part of the solution to that energy balance issue that was raised earlier. I don't know, Mark, if you want to come in with another set of comments on that. You took your microphone off.
Yeah, I mean, just with the time left, it'd be nice to just think about what should that future look like, right? What if we could wave a magic wand, and if we were truly effective at seizing the opportunity. I mean, it is an opportunity to do things right. What does that really look like? And there's a couple things that it's I think we've all advocated for, but the thing to keep in mind is that on the power system, being able to sectionalize a line, transmission line, if I haven't seen the exact power flow analysis, but I'm assuming that if in the area where the transmission line supplies power to that neighborhood, it wasn't just that neighborhood that would have like gone down if it turned off. Um, but if we had a lot of autonomy and community level assets, things could be turned off well ahead of time. And we can have, like if we have those fire drills, right? It's like, okay, we're gonna everybody evacuates, get in the line, go outside. This is the meeting point. I mean, can we have that test system for our power system where, okay, once a year we're gonna like turn off the power, sectionalize it. Everybody's batteries are going to come on, solar, and really see if we have enough autonomy. And I don't know if the power system at the individual home or neighborhood level has transformed to truly be able to do that. But that's one thing. And then the fire resilience part. I mean, there's an iconic, now iconic photo of a lone standing house, and it was a passive house, right?
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Altadena. And it's because that it was airtight. It didn't have entry points. It didn't have ingress points for
Sparks
members to come in.
Yeah.
Adequate clearance around the property, and there's things like that. But it'd be good to just see what people think a good future would look like. And I know Josh is off mute too.
There are a lot of good comments you've just raised. Real quick, I was working in Russia in the mid 1990s, and their concept, and I'm not related to today's Russia at all, so don't think I'm going that way. But their demand side management machinery was you, and you, dum, 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 you're out. And they would sectionalize and they'd turn people off. And they had a system that was robust so he can go down and come back up. Well, move that tape forward to today in America, and you're looking at much more distributed generation. You're looking at many sources coming from different places. The idea of sectionalizing and making the system more robust uh, is a huge, huge opportunity if we're prepared to go that way. Um, I have one big question, which is unanswerable. Is there any way this conversation can be raised at the federal level? Richard Yancey sent me a quote saying, we'll know, he got it from somewhere else. We'll know climate change is understood as real when you can no longer get a 30-year mortgage in Florida. Um, that's not just tree hugging and it's not sustainability and it's not DEI. It's actually about an entire building industry and an insurance industry. Is there a conversation that could happen with the federal level, or should we just stay at the state and community level for now? Anybody want to field that one, or do they want to avoid it desperately?
No, I mean, I think California is fairly emboldened. At the last, we have this organization called NASIO, National Association of State Energy Officials. I think the representative from California has been the chair historically of that. And I think there's at the federal level, an individual, made a statement at that saying there's no energy transition and climate change isn't real. So I think you have your answer, Scott, that this has to be a state and local. And in fact, the next big conference from the Energy Commission is the Energy Transition Conference. So that's kind of, pretty interesting choice here. But again, every time Josh, I see you come off mute, I know that you're kind of close to some of these things as well. So if you have insight.
All right. Well, since you came off, Josh, over to you.
Yeah, I largely agree with Mark. I think there are a number of things that the federal government could do to contribute to finding solutions here. I think it seems fairly clear that things are headed in the opposite direction. We're currently dismantling our emergency response infrastructure at the federal level. So the problems and disagreements are more fundamental. That said, I think we've danced around this issue, but home builders have historically represented a significant political and lobbying force in the United States. And they are a group that can speak at a federal level with and be heard by federal actors who are not interested in listening to people thinking about sustainability, equity, and home access, climate adaptation, the issues that we're foregrounding here. But I think thinking more about the initial questions of what it actually costs not to build safely, sustainably, resiliently, and then advocating on those grounds is critical. Yeah. And I hope that we will see more of that as the conversation in Los Angeles turns more to the methods of rebuilding and to who does the rebuilding. I also just wanted to make a quick comment back to Mark's reference to the survivability of Passive House. I think also the acute climate impacts often mask the chronic climate impacts, but the science suggests that the biggest killer from these wildfires will be the smoke, because the smoke blanketed the entire region. Millions of people were subjected to it. Even outside of what we now believe to be the fire risk zones, building in a manner that produces a sealable envelope can, not only protect a lot of lives and a lot of health, but also really reduce the burdens being added to the healthcare system in the medium to long term. So I think as we talk about this, a lot of the conversation about how to rebuild focuses on the burn areas, but the existence of these new exacerbated climate disasters implicates everyone.
Michael is a builder in Ireland, and he has built some passive homes in a town that is actually known for particulates from transportation. He brought along filters from one of his homes to the United Nations in Geneva. I was running a program there, and he demonstrated that the indoor air quality with the passive house, active filtration and active air circulation was significantly better than what you had in the outside environment. Well, take that forward to what you've just described. If you had those kinds of systems in homes in other areas, then the risk from smoke inhalation would also be reduced. And I find that an interesting connection. Michael, you came off mute. Are you wanting to come in?
Yes, I remember that bringing those filters. I just happened to throw them into the case as I was traveling before I traveled. The interesting thing about that was I'd also, in our capital city, Dublin, I'd also built some houses where the concentration of traffic was way, way higher than in a rural town. And our filters in our rural town, the tar and the grime and the soot, that we got in those filters. In the city, where I expected it to be a lot worse, the filters were a lot cleaner. We changed the filters every 90 days. So, you had 3 months, and I couldn't believe it to put one filter up against the other to show that a rural town, could be that much more, contaminated, really.
Yeah. So I think Barbara Ann is going to yell at me if I go over. We promise everybody an hour, so we'll deliver an hour. I would like to thank Mark on your sick bed for dragging yourself out to speak with us. Either the whiskey or the chicken noodle soup and vitamin C, whatever your solution is. Joshua, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate your insights, and hopefully we can continue this conversation going. I especially like the idea of engaging with the buildings associations that can carry that conversation to DC. And Michael, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to be with us. With that said, thank you all, and I'll turn it back to Barbara Ann.
Thanks, Scott. And I'm just sorry that Frances wasn't able to stay with us. And as she said, she had her time zones wrong, so she didn't have, she was traveling at the time, so she obviously dropped. But hopefully Frances Sawyer will be able to join us at some other time, because she sounds like she's someone we need to speak to and listen to. Thank you all so much. That was, I know it's very topical topic, but you know, that conversation has been so interesting, and it's the kind of thing we need to be talking about, because this, you know, I suppose I have said that people won't realize or won't accept the climate change is happening until New York City is flood, you know, is underwater. We now have LA in this situation it's in, so you know that's the reality, and people have to start accepting it. And when you can't get a mortgage, a 30-year mortgage in Florida, in some parts of Florida, that is an issue. It's going to spread wider if you can't get insurance. So thank you all so much for contributing today. Really, really do appreciate it. We have recorded this webinar and it will be on our website in the next few days, I hope. We will be holding a webinar again next month. I'm not quite sure. We have 3 different people who are lined up to do the next 3, so I'm not sure what order they're in. So hopefully you will all be able to join us. We will revert to our usual time of 4 p.m. Irish time, which is a half hour later than we were today. But thank you all again for joining us, and we'll have you gone there. It's just gone the half hour, so we have done our best, and we've kept to our word of just taking an hour. So thank you all so much, and have a great evening or day, whatever part of the world you're in.
Bonsoir avec tout le monde.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.